Turn the lights back on. Wow. Retro electro tech. When real audio ruled the world.
Greetings once again, all you vintage audio hound dogs and pretty kitties. Pardon the noise in the background. The heater is going to be cycling on and off because that's the way it is this time of year, and it is a loud heater, so not much I can do about it. But I will try to talk above it as much as possible. So there you go. What we have here on the bench is a Harman Kardon 430 receiver, that of which I did a video on, a preliminary evaluation video on it and a couple of turntables that I was evaluating for my customers. So I'm not going to be doing a lot of work in this receiver at the request of the customers, but I am going to perform some basic maintenance, and part of that basic maintenance being the servicing of the controls, doing a multi-flush cleaning and relubricating of the controls. I'm going to talk about that. Now, I already did most of the service on these controls, but I am going to talk a little bit about it and just kind of show you what I had going on here. And this is a lot of rinse and repeat. That's the nature of servicing this gear that's, multi-decades old, in order to, smooth out the controls and keep them nice and quiet. Because oftentimes, as you know, these controls get staticky, they get intermittent, they can get a bit noisy and problematic. Not so much with these controls. These weren't too bad, but I'm just kind of going in and doing some preventative maintenance, if you will. And, of course, so the customers don't have problems creep up anytime soon with these controls. So that's why you have to go in here like I did and really devote the time and attention to properly flushing these controls multiple times, and that's the key, multiple times. And another key point is really exercising the controls quite a bit. Some people, I understand, might be in a hurry, or they don't want to devote the work that's needed to, pull the boards out, because different designs are different as far as accessibility to the controls, gaining access, pulling them out. In fact, I'm going to go over a few things that made pulling these boards out a little bit more difficult. And even though there wasn't a lot of obstacles in the way, but you'll see what I'm talking about in a moment. But that's what needs to be done if it's going to be done properly. And there's also different levels of servicing these type of controls based on their condition and how far you need to go and whether or not the customer is going to want to pay for that, so forth and so on. So that's why I'm going to talk about this. And this is a lot of rinse and repeat, like I said. Other videos I've talked about this, but being that this stuff is so routine and needs to be done so often on this equipment, I'm going to talk about it periodically here and there. So if you've already watched videos that cover this topic, hey, you might want to skip this one. I understand. But some people that might be newer to this channel or just stopping in may not be able to find this type of content in some of my other videos or whatever the case. So, again, I'm going to talk about this, and maybe it might prove useful to some people. And that's about it. So let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer. Okay, so here we are zoomed in on the switchboards, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why I employ the method that I employ to clean these type of switches, and why I do what I do in general to clean switches and potentiometers. So on these switches here, for the most part, these are sealed switches. Okay, and I say for the most part because you can see at the bottom here the white of the shaft or the plunger of the switch. You can see it through the bottom here on the belly of the switch, and you can even see it moving in and out. And you might be saying, well, there's your access. Why don't you utilize that to inject your contact cleaner and your lubricant and so forth? And you probably could get a little bit in there, but there's not enough space between that plunger and the case of the switch here on the belly. In fact, the plunger, or the shaft, if you will, is right up against the opening. It's pressed right up against there, so there isn't enough of a gap or airspace really to get your applicator in there and really flush a good amount of cleaner and get enough lubricant in there really to effectively clean and relubricate the internal contacts and so forth, the internal structures in there, so that they operate smoothly and all that good stuff. You'll see that at the rear of the switches, you'll see these little holes that I drilled into the rear of these switches. And first of all, when I say drill, I'm not talking about with a power drill, an electric drill motor or anything like that, because if you were to pop through quite rapidly, then you can cause damage in there. You don't want to do that. So I choose to use one of these Archimedes type drills. I have pin vices as well, but I like these Archimedes drills. You can use a pin vise. You can even use just the bit and kind of tunnel your way through little by little, but just use a pin vise. You'll get through a little quicker. And but anyways, when you're drilling through, you want to be careful not to drive shavings into the hole when you pop through. So as you're moving along, you're kind of cleaning the surface area of shavings and then continuing your drilling, wipe away the shavings and all that. And just before you pop through, you're going to meet some resistance. You're going to feel the drill bit kind of tighten up a little bit, sort of seize up. That's when you know you're getting ready to pop through. When you're at that point, especially if you're using one of these Archimedes drills where you're kind of pumping your way through, just stop and go the rest of the way with your fingers and just carefully pop through, and then right when you pop through, just kind of pull out to withdraw any shavings. I have a little tiny hose that I attach to my vacuum as well. I happen to have one of those with the little micro attachments and all that for cleaning in tight spaces. I'll get one of those sometimes and just kind of touch it to the rear where I just drilled through to possibly suck out any shavings. Again, if a little bit falls in there, it's not going to hurt anything. It's not going to cause the switch to seize up. You just don't want to drive a lot of shavings in there and just drill through like a wild person and push shavings down in there. So I just wanted to touch on that as well. Work clean and carefully, and like I said, drill toward the rear, because as you can see the white shaft through the hole that I drilled. Well, that's why you want to have the switch disengaged, okay, so you don't drill through that shaft. So have the switches disengaged while you're drilling toward the back of the switch with this style of switch here, and you'll typically be okay. So that's a method that I employ, and other techs as well, people that work on this stuff. It's not rocket science, and that's one of the best ways that I've found to gain access to this type of a switch, where you want to get in there and really do some heavy duty flushing and really working the switches and exercising them, and flush them again, and, multiple times, and then when everything's dried out, inject your lubricant, just a few drops of like some Fader lube, and I'll be right back in just a moment to show you kind of what I use to get my cleaner and my lubricant into those holes there. Okay, so the $1,001 question: how do I get the cleaner and lubricants into the controls? It depends on the type of controls. My accessibility, which as you can see is why those of us who service this gear find it necessary to gain access. Some people that just want to clean pots and switches but don't really want to get into the disassembly aspect of things because of numerous reasons. I know sometimes this can get a bit intimidating, and for some anyways, access can be difficult in certain makes and models. But in order, again, as I always say, in order to do a thorough job, this is what you have to do. So accessibility has a lot to do with it. Now, I've received pieces of equipment that you could tell somebody just tried to, really hose down the potentiometers, kind of a spray and pray kind of scenario, hoping that some of the solvent would get into the controls and remedy their problems that they were having with controls. But it ends up getting all over the board, and sometimes they use solvents that have lubricants in them. There's a time and place to use that, especially the stuff that already has, additives and certain types of protectants and lubricants and all that. You don't want to get that crap all over the board. That's why also too, when I'm working on this stuff, I will mask off the piece of equipment I'm working on. I had some rags in here kind of clamped, held in position so that when I was squirting solvents and stuff wasn't getting on the boards. But accessibility has a lot to do with it. That's what I'm trying to say. So that's going to dictate what you're going to be able to use to get your cleaners in, as opposed to just one of those spray and pray methods of just hosing everything down. That's not the way to do it. That's not good for the boards, especially when you're dealing with cleaners that have the lubricants in them and all that. But I will mention in brief, I choose to use just a straight contact cleaner that doesn't have any lubricants in it. Something that, again, because of the switches that I'm servicing here, they do have plastics. Something that, at least according to the manufacturer, is plastic safe, quick drying. It doesn't leave residue behind and all that stuff. So I like to flush out the controls. Same with potentiometers, which, as I pointed out, are down here. I like to use something that is just a straightforward cleaner. Get in there, get the job done, flush multiple times, exercise the controls, and then reintroduce a lubricant, okay? I bring this out all the time. So as far as what I use, based on accessibility and reach, okay, good old-fashioned reach to the various ports. Like for example, you'll notice on here, I have a straw that I adapted a needle applicator, which I bent so that it has a curve on it. And the reason I do that, and what I use this for most of the time, is when I'm dealing with potentiometers that have their ports facing the board. Now, when I'm doing a level of service where it's just not in the budget or the time isn't there for me to desolder the controls from the board, well then I could reach underneath, as you can see here, and let me just carefully bend this capacitor back a little bit. But you'll notice, see, I can reach behind here with this curved needle, drop down into the port, and then fire away and inject the solvent in there and then exercise the pot and all that. In some cases where the control is really, really bad, it's best to desolder from the board so that you have the whole control in your hand. You can really go into the ports and blast away and position for drainage and exercise and all that. That's a better method, but sometimes when you can't do that, this is the next best thing, just to go in there and you got some reach and so forth. Now, in this case, there happens to be one pot on the board that has its ports on the top. In that case, you can use, just your run-of-the-mill, straight straw and just go right in and, blast away. But sometimes you need to get a little creative with your applicators. You can see that, I use these squeeze bottles a lot for, various lubricants and whatever I'm using. So, as you can see, and I also have syringes too that you can adapt some of these needles to, and catheters and all that. These like different IV catheters and all that stuff, needles that you can just and they sell these needles in different sizes and so forth. You can bend them and you can adapt them onto a syringe and all that. So again, this isn't the absolute final word on the topic. It's just to kind of get people thinking who are interested in working on this stuff. So this is principle based, I suppose. Let me just put it like that. You can see I have all these different little tools, the way I'm going to drill holes, or you can use a pin vise, or you can use this bottle with a curved needle, or I even or a curved straw, on the can to reach in different places. So it's just kind of to get you thinking once again. So let me go ahead and move on, because I'm going to talk about some of the obstacles that I ran into a little bit. Okay, and I'm briefly going to touch on accessibility, gaining access to these boards, and when you're removing these boards, some precautions you need to take. And I can't walk a person through this process. I can only, mention some of the more principle-based things, based on different makes, models, and all that. You're just going to run across problems sometimes with accessibility. There's no getting around it. When you have a lot of wires to contend with and you're trying to maneuver these boards out so that you can gain access, sometimes you run into problems. For example, when you're trying to pull these boards back, of course I have the knobs on there, but obviously you would have the knobs off. You just removed the nuts from the bushings here on the pots, and you're trying to pull the board back, but you have wires that are kind of hindering that process, and you're trying to get the right angle of the dangle. Well, sometimes it becomes evident that you're just going to have to remove some wires. You're going to have to desolder some wires. Of course, you're going to want to mark them. And that's another thing. You have to be very careful. When you're working with these boards, you really want to scan the real estate and make sure that you don't see any wires that end up popping off when you're maneuvering this. If you notice a wire that pops off, try right away to identify where that came from and make note of that, and because that's really important. Because wires will pop off every once in a while. That's just the nature of the beast. There's no getting around it, but you can minimize that problem and a lot of times prevent it, although it will still happen every once in a while, by just maneuvering things carefully, okay? And moving things as a unit, not engaging in any type of manipulating of the board that really twists the wires around and causes them to break off. You got to be careful. And so sometimes you have to just disconnect wires in order to get these boards out enough to be able to service them. That's just the way it goes. I had to do that with these boards. There was a few wires that I had to disconnect. One of the biggest things I had to contend with on this unit, besides removing a couple wires, these wires here, you'll notice these boards were kind of sandwiched together almost, okay? And these wires here, this red wire and this white wire, they feed up through this hole here and this hole here. They sort of interconnect these two boards together via these wires. And you'll notice here on the top, you see this hole here and this one down here. Well, the wires come up through here. One solders onto this post, the other solders onto this post. And, that, of course, I had to pull these apart in order to gain access to the bodies of these switches, to drill them, to inject contact cleaner and lubricant and so forth. Okay, so there was that. Also, too, there were these, there is these resistors here that solder onto the, I don't know if you can see them, you might be able to, yeah, up here. Let me reposition the camera a little bit, but you can see the pins or the terminals of this headphone jack. Well, these resistors here, these 330 ohm resistors, solder to the connections there of the headphone jack. And not that it's real important, but I will mention what those are for in case you're wondering. Those are to attenuate the signal level from the amplifier to the headphone jack and kind of, I guess for lack of a better term, perform some signal level matching so that the volume level of the headphones is close to that of the speakers, okay? So that there's not a big difference between the headphone volume versus the volume of the speakers. It kind of serves a twofold purpose in that these resistors here also serve as a means of current limiting, and there you go. So those resistors, the point is those resistors are important, and when I was trying to get these boards out, obviously these were soldered to that headphone jack, so I had to desolder those. In the process, one of the leads fell off this 330 ohm resistor here, so I'm going to have to replace this resistor. Not a big deal, but again, folks, that's the kind of stuff that you're going to have to contend with when gaining access to boards and the wires and maneuvering the boards and angling them a certain way as to be very careful so you don't flex them too much and compromise solder joints on the boards, or heaven forbid end up cracking a board or something like that. And some are very straightforward to get to, some of them not so much. Some of them there's a lot of disassembly involved to get to the boards. There wasn't a lot of disassembly with these ones, but there was some wires I had to disconnect. Those weren't the only wires that I had to disconnect that I pointed out. There were a couple other wires up here that I had to disconnect as well. So things like that, which I can't walk you through. These are things you're going to have to figure out on your own based on the make and model, but just be aware of some of the do's and don'ts, and just using caution when you're trying to maneuver these into position so that you can service them, service the controls and so forth. So guys, I'm going to go ahead and end the video here. Hopefully this information was helpful. As I always say, peace, love, music, and the vintage audio that brings it to your ears. Until next time, you all take care.
This is a poor man's shoe production.